By way of beginning, I do want to say that I know some of you casually, but there are a number of you that I don't know very well at all. So I thought it might be helpful to quickly summarize my professional background. This year I celebrated my 30th year in local government administration and 23rd year as a city manager. Later this year I will mark my 10-year anniversary as the city manager in Pensacola. I hold a bachelor's degree in accounting as well as an MBA. And additionally, I am a credentialed manager by the International City County Management Association. This requires a baseline of education experience and skill attainment, as well as a continuing education requirement of 80 hours per year. I'm past president of the Florida City County Management Association, have chaired and served on the association's ethics committee for a number of years, and also serve on several national association boards. Mentioning ICMA, the International City County Management Association, it is important to note that this is the association that governs our profession and establishes expected professional and ethical standards by which all members must adhere. Highlights of these ethical standards include a dedication to the concepts of effective and democratic local government by responsible elected officials, and a belief that professional general management is essential to achievement of these objectives. Also includes a commitment to professional management for local government, including a professional objective management for local government, including a prohibition of participating in any political activity at local, state, or federal level. I tell people the only thing that our association allows city managers to do is vote, and that is it. And that includes state, local, and federal level. Includes a prohibition of owning investment property in the community in which you manage, except a principal residence. Includes a commitment to serve the best interests of all citizens, not just those who support a particular point of view, a political persuasion, or association with a particular power base in the community. And I reiterate, I take these commitments very seriously in my job and have for the last 30 years. I say all this because while I'm not here today to necessarily promote or defend council manager form of government, I do believe I understand pretty well how it's supposed to work. It is the combination of this so-called corporate model, which I know Dr. Haraway talked to you about earlier, the broad elected representative of citizens' interests, professional and non-political management, and the ability to remove a city manager immediately who is not meeting the needs of the community, that makes council manager form of government the preferred choice of majority of cities in the United States today. And according to the ICMA, in the past 10 years, there have been 49 referenda across the country in communities that are either considering generally either a change from council manager government to mayor council government, or conversely changing from mayor council government to council manager government. And in 39 of those 49 referenda, council manager government was the choice. Clearly, some of the larger cities like San Diego, like Miami, like Kansas City, like St. Petersburg, and a few others visibly have moved to mayor council government in the last 10 to 15 years. But I'm not sure that I would personally agree that this is evidence of any kind of movement. And those are just some aside comments that I felt like I had to make to you personally today.
I was reading here, and in case I misread, you don't have to live in the state of Florida. Is that what I read?
I'm not sure.
You're not required to live in the state of Florida? Is that what I'm reading?
I don't know what you're reading, sir, but I'm required to live within the city limits.
Okay.
I think in terms of at least the old chart, well, our current charter is not old. It's the one that in 1931, there's a section, and you might want to cite it, that does talk about residency requirement or the lack of.
It says here you're not required to live in the state of Florida or the city of Pensacola.
Yeah, and that may be somewhat of an antiquated provision. I mean, I guess it could or couldn't be, but the city council has adopted a requirement that both the city attorney and the city manager live within the city limits, and they are the only two employees that are required by the city council to live in the city limits. There are a number of employees that, as a part of their contractual relationship that I negotiate, are required to live within the city limits, like the police chief, fire chief, and many others.
And Tom, one of the things I think that brings up, this is a 6-page document. maybe you want to go through this and say, wait a minute, this isn't even applicable, because it's in there. You don't have to live in the state of Florida. So, unknown to us, there's something that's amended our charter. Again, it goes back to what Ms. Barnett has raised, what's governing here.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't know as citizens that we operate under a charter that may not be something that's actually being utilized. You may want to go through that charter, and I recognize the new model, or the 8th edition of the model charter, is quite a bit more comprehensive, and that's obviously a starting point for us. But maybe you want to even just provide us a written report. One of the things that I wanted to talk to Ms. Barnett about doing is I thought she was very helpful in last meeting relating to the citizen input. If maybe the League of Women Voters want to put forth a paper dealing with what they see as issues, maybe you want to have your staff do something similar, because there are issues in this charter that are glaring that I know we're going to have to address.
Well, and we would be glad to do that, particularly for those things that are not, not real policy-oriented that you'll be considering. I think we've just been hesitant to get too far ahead of you, and if that is something that the commission would like the staff or my office or the attorney's office to get a yellow highlighter out and say, here's some things we think are not really relevant anymore, we'd be glad to do that.
It'd be helpful.
Yeah.
I'm seeing heads around the commission, shaking,
We'd
so
be
that
glad
would
to
be
do that.
helpful.
Mm-hmm. Issues about population growth, about Residential movement or quality of neighborhoods, all those kinds of things. Clearly, those are issues that we are comfortable with and frequently bring initiatives to address where we think there are problems.
Well, how do you all then address them as a manager and your staff when you say, all right, the city of Pensacola is losing population? Do you all have visioning process? Do you have, like many of us have our own business and we'll do 5 and 10-year plans, and then we start implementing those plans, and it takes updated visioning process. Do you all do
Yes.
that within the city?
Yep.
Is this open to the public? How is it done? I mean, how can we know what your vision, Tom Bonfield, is for Pensacola?
Well, first of all, the visioning process isn't Tom Bonfield's visioning process.
And that's fair, I understand.
It's, it would be depending on the circumstance, it would be in some cases the city council with this, typically at the beginning of every new council term, the council holds a goal-setting visioning workshop, if you want to call that. The citizens are always, welcome to attend that. The city has a comprehensive plan for the entire city. In fact, we are just right now in the process of doing what's called an evaluation and an appraisal report of that plan to identify what in the plan is working, what's not working, where there needs to be improvements. There is a number of public workshops that have been initiated to gather that feedback.
And who provides the leadership in those workshops? Because there always has to be a leader.
Well, yeah, there is, and it varies. It's myself. In the case of the comprehensive plan, it's going to be the Department of Community Development Director Thaddeus Cohen. All of this ultimately still comes back to the City Council, as a part of that process. There are some council members who might, become more involved than others. As it relates to the CRA area, that's another one where there is a CRA plan. That plan is updated periodically. We are just now beginning the process of the new so-called visioning of the CRA plan. Again, evaluating the plan. What have we accomplished? What's left to be accomplished? What works? What's broken? What needs to be fixed? I think more of that goes on than maybe I'll put it in both sides that most citizens know or care to know about, and also probably that then we need then we do a good enough job keeping people informed about all what is going on. I do think that in the case of plans, the people like to say that we just do plans and put them on the shelf, but I think if you go back and kind of check the list, a little more happens than sometimes people realize. Sometimes it takes longer than people wish it would take, but I think there are ideas and plans out there. The how effective it is, I think, is not from me to be the judge of that. It's for citizens to be the judge of that, and the elected officials to be the judge of that through their citizenry. I mean, I think the processes are in place for the agenda and the priorities to be established by the collective council. And, let's be honest about it. I mean, in whether it's our families or our business organizations or our social organizations, sometimes it may seem easier to have, one person make all the decisions or set that agenda, and that's not the system of what's, happens in council management. It is the collective body of a group of elected officials that represents a cross-section of citizens, those with a power base, those without a power base, those with economic base, those without, who make a collective decision. But I do believe that once that is established, it is the manager's responsibility to carry it out. Whether I agree with it, believe in it or not, it makes not one bit of difference. And I tell the staff many times, we are not the gatekeepers. We are there to execute to the best of our ability the policies and the goals and the aspirations that the city council sets. And I think once those are in place, that's what we do. And to the extent that we don't do it to the council's satisfaction and to the community's satisfaction, shame on us. And we deserve to be questioned about that. I mean, there are things sometimes that are out of our control, whether it be budget or whether it be political decisions. But I mean, I think that there's nothing that's necessarily flawed in the system if people feel like priorities or vision or whatever, however you want to characterize that, are not being properly executed.
You said that you had been a city manager for 23 years. Those were in cities, were they smaller or larger than Pensacola?
Smaller.
Okay, significantly smaller?
Well, I would say maybe 2/3 to half the size, population-wise. In other respects, equal to in terms of either development activity or business employment, some things like that.
Okay. So, and to be clear, you said before that this is a business model. This is that we currently have. A business model like we would say Bechtel or Exxon or General Motors is how we operate the city. Would you agree with that?
Well, I guess in the context of there is a group of stockholders who might otherwise be called citizens, and a board of directors that might otherwise be called the city council, and a chief executive officer that might otherwise be called the city manager. And to the extent that the board of Exxon are doing what's in best interest to the stockholders of Exxon, and they provide direction to the chief executive officer to carry that out, then I would say yes, that's the case.
That's all I have.
Yes, Mr. Armstrong.
To follow up on what he just asked, I have a question. What is your view or opinion about heads of department that you nominate be confirmed by the council? How would that affect your job in any manner, or can you enlighten me?
Well, it again is one of those two-edged swords. I think that that's not uncommon. There are many communities that have that in place, and to do that wouldn't necessarily violate the principles of council manager government. I guess on a very philosophical, maybe puristic standpoint, I would think that if the city council trusts the manager enough to operate the city on a day-to-day basis, then they should make have enough confidence in the city manager's decisions about appointment of department directors. I think the city manager probably knows best what is the best fit for a particular department. Does that mean that I never filter or at least assimilate feedback from the community or from the elected officials about where things are, their perception of where things are going well and where they're not, and take that into consideration? Of course I do. But I also don't think it's necessarily the end of the world. I just think that doing that, quite frankly, places elected officials many times in a very difficult situation because they don't know the details, and tends to very much politicize the appointment process for what should be one based on experience and fit and those kinds of things. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's not. I don't think it's necessarily yes and no. I think there's definitely some pros and cons to that.
One small question. Can you run through for me how the council evaluates your performance? How often is that? What's involved with that?
Well, I mean, in terms of a formal process, this city council has tended not to want to do that. It's something I think you'll see in the model city charter is something that should be required. I personally think it's the right thing to do, and quite frankly, every place I ever worked but here, I had that. On the other hand, the city council basically says they evaluate me every council meeting. I'm being evaluated in terms of how long I would be employed or whatever. But I think it's healthy. I think that it is important for the feedback. The manager obtained feedback from elected officials to understand how their performance, the manager's performance, as well as the staff's performance is being perceived. Because quite frankly, if there's a problem, we need to know. It makes no sense for elected officials to be frustrated, for elected officials to be unhappy if they haven't taken the step to communicate in a collective way. There's always going to be situations where people have varying views about certain situations. I understand that. But I think it's something that is healthy. Just coincidentally, this year, as a part of the credentialed manager program, you are required to have a 360-degree review. So I actually had to make council members do that evaluation this year, just because if I didn't get them to do it, I was going to lose my credential status. So the majority of them did turn that back in. Although I must say, even that situation was one of a confidentiality where they submitted it back in blind. And so all I got back was the collective response of those evaluations. But I think it's important. I think it's very important.
So one of the things that keeps coming up is the question of leadership. So if we, as a community, elected a firebrand leader to our council, how can they get things to happen in this structure, in the sense that you have your strategic plan and things like that, but maybe if there's something that would fit in, that they have a great idea, hey, let's start this. Or, I mean, there are a lot of things that go on that aren't probably you didn't know about 2 years ago that come up. So how does the elected council person propagate something to happen?
Well, I mean, I think it rests in each and every elected official to provide leadership. It's not something that two people get to be leaders and the other ones have to sit quietly. I mean, that kind of contrary to the system of, as I said, every council member has equal power. And with that equal power comes equal responsibility to provide leadership. Does that mean that everybody gets their way? And, no, that's not the way the system is designed to work. But from my standpoint, I'm trying to stay away from the word strong mayor, because I know that's different. It's just like I wouldn't want you to call the council manager government the city manager form of government. I wouldn't want you to call the mayor council form of government strong mayor. But on the other hand, I believe we need to have a strong city manager, a strong city council, and a strong mayor. I mean, that's what that's what we need, and I'm not criticizing anybody for not being that. I mean, I just think that's something that but this question of leadership and vision, it's floating around all over the place. If you read the Model City Charter, that it's a hot topic. It's probably the topic that has emerged the most from the 7th edition to the 8th edition. It's something we talk about professionally all the time, and it is for systems to be effective, there has to be a collaboration, no matter how it's set up. And And while I have only worked in council manager government, I have worked around many places where there's been, mayor council government, and I've seen it some good, seen some bad, in all circumstances. So I don't necessarily know that it's just one set of words on a page that automatically provides that solution. I mean,
Well, and one of the questions, I wrote up several questions, and they may not flow because I was making them as you were making certain comments. But for instance, in today's paper, we're looking at the state average of poverty is 11.9. We find ourselves at 14.2%. We find ourselves among the worst in the state of unwed mothers. We find ourselves among the highest in Medicaid recipients. We find ourselves in some statistics that, the lowest in per capita income. These aren't statistics that within a community that we are necessarily proud of. So, if there is a plan, and one of these plans that you talked about that would be this high, are there issues in this plan, is there a plan or specifics within this document that you're talking about that would begin to address the issues that are important to Pensacola, or is that something you don't feel like is the city manager's job? Is that something to go back to the council under our current form?
Well, the answer is there's not a simple answer to that, Ms. Spencer. Specifically, let me just throw a couple of examples, like the poverty issue. The council has already identified addressing the poverty issue as one of their 20 goals, and directed by that, we and the staff have formed a number of teams and are coming back with have come back with a variety of recommendations. At the same time, that's not just a city issue, that's a community issue. And so, just as an example, working with the United Way, the community collaborative process is underway, which is a partnership of a lot of different agencies and entities. I'm on the poverty solutions team. Did I go ask the city council if it's okay if I serve on the poverty solutions team to work with other community partners to seek solutions? No. They know I'm on it, but I didn't go ask their permission. So, it really, it depends on a particular situation. Whether it's a city issue that the city is a part of, a partnership in, or just maybe the sole determiner of. Trying to think of another example that it's rare that we wouldn't communicate with council about what we're doing, but I wouldn't say that we run to the city council and ask for every step, because we develop a good relationship. I feel very confident. I know what the majority policy perspective is of the elected body, and I think that's one of the things that makes you a skilled city manager, quite frankly. And when there's issues that you need to that you can move a little faster on and move a little farther out front without anybody getting their feelings hurt or without there being some question about direction. And there's other times that it's important to get clear direction from the elected body. So.
Are there also examples, or are there members of ICMA that participate, or not participate wouldn't be the right way to ask it, but let's say you have a mayor situation, elected mayor, who has then a city manager that runs the day-to-day, something of a hybrid of what we've known or called a strong mayor, and then the city council. So it's still a mayor council, but the city manager runs the day-to-day and has quite a bit of the executive duties. Are those city managers also part of ICMA?
They can be, but they don't have to be. And the difference is that ICMA has two categories of not individual memberships, but what they classify as local governments. You're either a council manager government or a general manager government. Typically, managers that work or systems that have a chief administrative officer that is not elected, would fall under that general management category. But in terms of an association, are there members of ICMA who work for a mayor? Yes, but there are some differences as to what they can and cannot participate in. Those individuals, for example, they are prohibited from participating in many of the political activities that you might envision would happen, where the mayor's campaign manager becomes their chief of staff or whatever, as part of the whole process by which those things could happen.
What can we do? What ideas can you put on the table in front of this group to avoid those types of situations going forward? I did understand you correctly when you said you believe in a strong mayor form of government and a strong manager form of government. Is that?
No, that wasn't what it said.
That
is not what I said at all.
I did misunderstand.
I said, I believe it's appropriate to have a strong mayor, a strong city council, and a strong city manager.
That's,
Had nothing to do with the form of government.
well, does that preclude that as a form, as an option of a form of government? All three being strong?
No. It's devil's in the details.
What's your experience as city managers under the charters that you work with? What types have seemed to work best to get the close to as you can to that, to where you've got strong positions at every level, or got a good balance of?
Reverend Crutcher, I don't know that there's any one answer. I mean, I think that would, that's going to probably be a matter of personal opinion, and my guess is you could ask, 10 people in 10 communities, and I'm not sure you'd get a consistent answer, because, it is a combination of the system and the people involved in the system and the community that is in particular, being considered. I would only suggest that, you look at what people who are a heck of a lot smarter and more experienced than me have tried to articulate in the Model Cities Charter. I mean, the National Civic League is an independent, don't have an axe to grind with anybody. These are really smart people, some practitioners, some academicians, and they study, what seems to work best around the country, and their whole thing is every, whatever, 8 or 10 years, they've been doing it since the 20s or 30s, they look at model forms of government and make recommendations on taking into account emerging trends and all those kinds of things. And I'm not going to beat around the bush. I think that as is articulated in that Model City Charter, the role of the mayor is one that has has received a lot of attention. And that's why there is I'm sure if you read, there's a lot of detail in there about better articulating the role of the mayor, even in council manager government. And so I would have to say, that's probably not my opinion. That's the opinion of the experts who have drafted the Model City Charter as something that they think ought to be paid attention to. They still, in that case, recommend council manager government, but recommend better articulating and defining the role of the mayor, because they're recognizing that in this day and age, with community participation, with the openness of government, but still the need for collaboration and professionalism, that there needs to be a better interaction, or a better maybe, assimilation of the roles of the elected officials and the professional administrators. When 30 years ago, when I first started out doing this, just give this chart, they taught you in school, and there was this policy and administration. And I think you maybe have seen this line, and it said, if it's below this line, it's policy, and the city manager doesn't say anything. And if it's above this line, it's administration, and the city council keeps their nose out of it. Well, that line looks like this about like now, and that that's part of the challenge of how best to articulate a charter that sets that out and meets the needs of the community.
You had a question, Natalie?
Yes, I think it was with regard to how you work with the mayor as opposed to council members. Is there any difference? Because he does lead the meetings, and he does have some responsibilities that are different.
Yes, and that's true not only here, that's true any place I've ever worked. While the mayor, in our case, is, and from a voting standpoint, an equal member of the council. I mean, clearly, the mayor in any community, that's elected at large, and in some cases, some mayors, are appointed from within the city council. I mean, they are elevated by the nature of their position to have a expectedly more visible community role. And in many respects, the mayor can find themselves in a similar situation that I could find yourself in, of knowing how far out in front of an issue that you should be or can be without building consensus, without collaborating with your fellow elected officials, when in fact, when it comes down to vote, you have the same vote as they do about moving forward, forward. But so I would say, while we clearly, communicate with elected officials to the best of our ability and intentions on an equal basis, personally, and I would have a much higher communication level with the mayor on an ongoing basis than I do other elected officials, and certainly more so than any of the other staff people.
John Peacock, 2038 Hesperia Way, Pensacola. Told you last time I wouldn't talk long, but I would come back frequently. I too want to echo what everybody said. I have the utmost respect for Mr. Bonfield. I think he's done an incredible job as city manager, but there is distinct differences between the forms of government that the council manager form versus a mayor council form, et cetera. I just want to discuss a couple things that were mentioned. Mr. Horton, you mentioned about the federal model, and Mr. Bonfield and I think agree on this. His comment was, when I said the federal model, I wasn't necessarily implying a Senate and a House and those kind of things. What I was more referring to as an executive and legislative branch, a mayor's office, if you will, and a council's group, and then the city attorney's office. That same structure where there's some discussion and accountability amongst the two is what I was referring to. So I wanted to clarify that. The council manager form is often referred to as the CEO or business model, where you have a CEO, et cetera. And my experience with CEOs has been that CEO's job is to make policy and present a vision to the board and then get the board to buy into that. That's a little different than what the ICMA and the council manager form, I think, promotes. So I'm a little hesitant to compare it to a pure business model like it's often done. Somebody mentioned, or when we were having a strong mayor debate a long time ago, and again, strong mayor, as Mr. Lozier mentioned before, when some people say that, they immediately think Castro, and nobody that I know of wants Castro in a dictator form. There's a big continuum between where we are now and a pure dictator form of government. So I hesitate to use that word, strong mayor, but one person mentioned what could happen under a strong mayor or leadership mayor form of government that couldn't happen under this form, and I thought it was a brilliant question, because the answer is nothing. Nothing couldn't happen under a different form of government that could happen now. The difference is it doesn't, because then it goes back to accountability. It's very difficult to affect change. As Mr. Bonfield pointed out, it takes 6 votes to set a direction. If you're a resident of the city of Pensacola, you get to vote for 4 folks. So your vote is difficult to actually affect change. That's one issue. And I think under our current system, leaders, so I think Ms. Pratt might have mentioned something about leadership, they're reluctant to come forward to be one of 10. People that really want to come forward with a passion, it's difficult to affect change when you're one of 10 meeting twice a month. Again, that's not a negative to Mr. Hall or any of the other council members or to Mr. Bond. It's just a difficult system in which to operate. I think that's all the notes I made.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I didn't buy a vote with anybody either, just to, for that.
Mr. Bonfield said a couple of times, with our present system, leadership doesn't rest in one place. Now, just because we had a mayor council form of government doesn't mean leadership would rest in one place either, does it?
No, I don't think so. But I think what it does is it creates good discussion. In other words, if I was the mayor, and just using for the example, and I decided I wanted to not have a port anymore, and the council decided they wanted to have a port, and they wanted to have a vibrant port and really move that port forward, that's going to create great discussion between the two. At the end of the day, the people that are going to decide are the citizens. Because either they're going to not elect me again to be mayor, or they're going to selectively take out the council members that are keeping me from closing down that port. That's good discussion. We don't currently have that, a lot of that now, where the citizens really get involved in that debate. The community maritime park was wonderful, agree, disagree. It created a lot of buzz in this community. There are people for and against it. For a short period of time, I think we had a strong mayor. That was Mortar Sullivan. And those folks that were out there really pushing this effort forward. It was a great discussion amongst the community to make something happen. And I think we lack that a lot. And I think that form of government allows, as somebody mentioned earlier, somebody to create an agenda, run on that agenda, and then be accountable to that agenda 4 years later. And again, whether you not use the leadership...
Sorry I asked such a difficult...
Whether or not you use the leadership form that's mentioned in the model or a pure strong mayor, there still provides for that leadership ability, that mayoral position to be the legislative lead in issues.
I have a comment to Jim and a question. When I talk to people, other people in this community who have been around as long as I have, and we comment about the leadership, the comment that was made to me was that when Jim Reeves sat on the city council, he worked well with the city, the existing city manager, and there was direction on the city council then. I would like for Jim to comment on this to the group, because I can't ask him that question outside of this room.
You asked it just the way I wrote it for you.
What's that?
I said you asked it just the way I wrote it for you. I appreciate that. But I think, well, you know, when you ask to be on this body, you're not supposed to have an opinion, so I'm really going to reserve the answer to that question. I think anytime you want to have leadership in the present form, you've got to have 5 other guys or girls that will vote with you. So I call it having a working majority. So any council member that could get a working majority can work with the city manager, I promise.
Okay, how do we find 6 people that think that way and get them involved enough to care?
Now, let me tell you, I'm just kind of a country lawyer, but when we say we have a meeting that meets from 4 to 6, whether it starts before 4 or ends after 6, you're illegal on both sides of it.
I think that's a way of avoiding the answer. So, and very artfully so. Yes, Ms. Barnett?
Over this, Sharon Barnett, and I'm here for the League of Women Voters, and I'm a resident and voter in the city of Pensacola also. A couple of points, general points, that I think you need to consider. You need to think about the abstract principles and the fundamentals, and then you have to discern your facts, and you have to think about the likelihood that certain things are going to occur. As Mr. Holmes was just describing, it can be the case that you have a particular council member who's a very strong visionary council member who can lead the others. But you as members of a charter review commission need to think about the likelihood that a 10-member council will produce consistent, coherent policies. That's something you can think about both in the abstract and in the particular. And with respect to policymakers, just as John Peacock just described, really the issue you have before you is whether you want to have one policymaker or 2 policymakers who can have a discussion with each other. Right now you have one policymaker. It's a 10-member council. And as Mr. Bonfield correctly described, that is who decides the policy, Mr. Holmes. So if they disagree with the staff, their view does prevail. That's your policymaker. Do you also want to have another policymaker, a mayor, so that you'll have two powers. And we would hope in the league that that would be balanced power. That is similar to the federal system. Admittedly, it's an analogy. We're not talking about a bicameral legislature, for example. Now, whether you want to go to that, it might be helpful, I think, to think about a few examples in the extreme. For example, take a very large city like New York City, and let's imagine it doesn't have a mayor, and it has 10 or 15 people on a council, and think about how New York would function. And then take a place that, let's just pretend for the sake of argument, somewhere like McDavid is incorporated. Do they need a separately elected executive and 5 or 6, 7 council members who can engage in extended discussion with each other? And I think you can see the point of those examples. What makes this a little tricky for you all is that we're a bit betwixt and between. We're not New York and we're not McDavid. So when you consider what you want to do, you need to think about our population, how many city functions we have, how complex those are, how much effect we have on the overall area, how much money is handled, and then I think you can begin to answer how many policymakers you want to have. And that's going to be a judgment call, and it cannot be made purely in the abstract. You've got to look at the facts, I feel, that pertain to the city of Pensacola. And I agree completely with John about the CEO model. That's probably not a very good analogy because most CEOs think GE, they lead their corporations. Having said that, particular facts and circumstances can differ. There can be strong boards. You could have a board with a Mr. Reeves on it who directs that CEO. That does happen sometimes, not typically. The importance of the facts should cause you to think about not overly relying on statistics. I've heard several comments about the prevalence of certain forms of government. That's all well and good. Make sure that those particular forms relate to our facts here. If everybody in the world had a strong mayor, or everybody in the world had a general manager, it might not be appropriate for us. So you need to step back and think about that. Statistics need to be applied appropriately. There were a few specifics that I wanted to address. Mr. Reeves mentioned that the city attorney thinks that we can, by ordinance, address a referendum election. That's true. You won't have a charter provision, but it could be done that way. But you all are here to propose a charter, and the significance of having it in a charter is that it can only be changed by the people. If it's an ordinance, as it stands now, any 6 members can change that.
Well,
And
if it's in the charter, what I asked was for him to list every situation where the city attorney said that that particular charter provision could be changed by ordinance. I was speaking specifically of the referendum. Now, the charter said the election had to be 60 days. The city attorney said it could be something else because of home rule. So all I was asking the city manager to do was, as when he went through those provisions, if there were other areas where an ordinance, because of home rule, could override a provision, please list that.
well, it's a little more complicated than that, and that's not Mr. Fleming's position as I understand it. It is his position that the referendum provision is an ordinance by operation of law, by operation of Florida statutes, okay? It is arguable that it's been repealed and nullified, so people could disagree about that, but let's pretend it's an ordinance. If it's an ordinance, even though it's in a piece of paper that says charter, it's not charter. That's why I've said this is kind of a mess and it needs to be repaired. But it's up to you all to decide if you want to provide the people with a charter provision for a referendum election, or whether you just want to not have one at all, or perhaps leave it to council to pass an ordinance. In that regard, that ties into the civil service question. And that's why I asked the question I asked. Because, and Ms. Stopp, your attorney, may want to comment on this, really plenary expansive powers were granted to municipalities upon the implementation of home rule. And because those special acts preceded that implementation, I cannot imagine why you can't, by charter, propose what you want and then let the people vote on it, and they'll either approve it or they won't. Maybe I'm missing something, but I think it's as simple as that. And our problem, Ms. Spencer, is that we never adopted a charter. Had never happened. It's just been special acts dribbling down from Tallahassee, and it's wonderful we're now doing it. Let's see. Also, one gentleman asked, one member asked about the council adopted requirements, like for living in the city. That's another example, like that referendum provision could be changed by 6 people. So if you want it in stone in a constitution, it needs to be proposed in this charter. Propose what you want in the charter and let the people vote on it. And with respect to heartburn, Mr. Bonfield said he didn't see anything that gave him any heartburn. Well, the referendum provision is just an example. There's some other heartburn examples, but that's a very good one. It provides that the council verifies referendum petitions. Well, the council can't verify referendum petitions. Only the supervisor of elections can. State law supersedes that. As a matter of law, that's the case. And as a matter of fact, guess how many petitions they verified in Trillium and Maritime Park? 0. 0. The supervisor of elections verifies them. Needs to be corrected. Another huge problem, when do you count your number of voters for referendum purposes? Our charter's silent. David Stafford tells me in one of these referendums, he was getting calls several times a day to see how many additional people had been registered. So too much toying with the process. That's the kind of thing that should cause heartburn. We should say, count the number of voters as of the closing of the books, the last election, or whatever you want to pick. And there you are. It's as simple as that. And yes, we'd be happy to do some league paper or answer whatever questions you have. I really appreciate that invitation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? And I didn't mean to cut the commission off. I just wanted to make sure that, given the lateness of the hour, that we did allow those in the public to address any questions that we may then refer on to Mr. Bonfield. But does anyone else have any questions of Mr. Bonfield? Well, I really appreciate you coming. We do, very much so, and we would appreciate anything that you will provide us in the future. And if you feel the need to come back, please do so. All you got to do is let me or Dr. Haraway know, and we'll make sure it's on the agenda.
Well, thank you, Ms. Spencer, and members of the commission. Certainly, I don't intend on coming back just to, just to come back. But if there are questions or additional information that I didn't, address or articulate that you had expected to hear today, I'd sure like to know about those, and I'll be glad to put together a response the best I can.
Thank you very
for your time.
much.
Appreciate it.